Okay, ladies and gentlemen, hello. It is 11 o'clock on the dot. Insiders, welcome. It is Justin Rivers with you this morning. Michelle, right now, Michelle and Augustine are in the process of moving, so we wish them luck. They're in between. I already see we've got very well trained insiders. You're already telling me where you're coming from. We've got Florida, New York here. We have Colorado, Monroe, lots of Florida, New York today. Goshen in that area, Toronto, welcome Toronto, Prospect Heights, Union Square, um, and Texas. Wow, welcome Texas. All right, so what I'm going to do is I am going to unmute Karen, our host for today, who will be doing this amazing Walt Whitman walk with us. Just give me a second here because I cannot see my cursor. Okay. Karen, are you there?
I am here, Justin.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, Karen, is I'm going to stop my share. Can you see yourself now?
I can, yes.
Okay, perfect. Great. So good. So Karen, everybody, just so you know, Karen and I did a test run, so we made sure connectivity is good. Just in case there are possible snafus, we've got some stuff prepared. I'm a big Walt Whitman fan myself, but there is no bigger than Karen Carboner, who actually, strangely enough, Karen, one of my favorite editions of Leaves of Grass is the one that I can dog ear and mark up. And you are the one who edited and put the introduction in. I just realized it because I was looking at it before. So now I'm starstruck, Karen.
Thank you so much.
Karen is the president of the Walt Whitman Initiative. She is going to be walking you through this great slice of the beginning of Walt Whitman's career and life in Brooklyn Heights. I am going to turn it over to Karen so she can get started. We may, depending on how Karen feels, do some Q&A in the middle if she wants to take a break and stop. So if you guys have questions during Karen's tour, please put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat. And then, of course, at the end of the tour as well, Karen will be taking questions. And then she's going to be letting us know about some of the great events that are coming up this weekend because it is Walt Whitman's 201st birthday tomorrow. So, woohoo, Walt. All right, Karen, take it away. It's all you.
Thank you so much, Justin. And I actually want to say thank you so much to the whole Untapped New York team, Michelle, Augustin. They have hooked me up with this stabilizer, guys. So I am a newbie with stabilizers. I'm going to have some fun today. So please excuse crazy errors and wild shots. I'm going to try to keep it under control. But it's really a lot of fun, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'm going to show my face just briefly. I'm observing all the rules in New York, but I just wanted to give a shout out to everybody. Welcome and happy birthday, Walt. And thank you so much for joining me for this very special tour of Whitman's beginnings in New York City. I need to give a special shout out to Greg Trupiano, my dear friend, who some of you may know that name. He led many a tour through Brooklyn, a Brooklynite, lifelong Brooklynite, Whitmaniac, a opera aficionado, a cultural activist, and a very, very dear friend that I lost this year. So this tour is dedicated in loving memory to Greg Trupiano, who so many of us miss, especially this Walt Whitman weekend. I want to also thank so many people for coming today. I know my daughter Annika is watching, so thank you, Annika, for sitting there and watching Mom. My husband, my students, my Columbia students of Poet of the Body, New York's Walt Whitman, thank you for joining us. And of course, my Whitmaniacs, my Whitman Initiative friends and all the Whitman circle. It really is a magical, loving group. And I'm really pleased to bring you to the cradle of Whitman's poetry today. I'm in the heart of Whitman's Brooklyn. And what you have behind me, of course, is a hot dog stand. I have a feeling Walt would have really liked that. But I'm standing at the very spot where Leaves of Grass was first printed. And speaking of which, I do a nifty thing here, turn my camera around and showing you this housing development that's been built here. It's quite a long story about what happened with the Rome Brothers printing shop. But first, what do we have here? Oh my goodness. Is it a copy of Leaves of Grass? Yes, indeed, folks. It's not the real one. That would cost me about $200,000 these days. It's a facsimile of the first edition of Leaves of Grass that was printed originally on this spot. I'm just going to pan around. As you see, not much is left of the original look of this area, but what you're looking at over here is Fulton Street. So right down here, which heads down to Brooklyn Bridge for my Brooklynites out there, was a daguerreotype studio run by Gabriel Harrison. And Gabriel Harrison was also an actor, a kind of a quirky fellow, and he ran this daguerreotype studio that was right down the street from the Rome Brothers printing shop. And legend has it that one day, let's see, I'm trying to get myself back on here. Am I there? Let me see. There I go. Legend has it one day Walt was walking down this very street behind me here, probably grabbing a hot dog from that guy right there. And Gabriel Harrison saw him and said, old man, stop for a minute. I need to take a photo of you. And Whitman, one of the most photographed poets of the 19th century, would never hesitate, especially from Harrison, a real talent. And he went up there and allegedly took that very famous daguerreotype, the lost one, that was the basis for the steel engraving in the first edition of Leaves of Grass. And actually, just because I have the book right here, I'm going to open to that page to plant that seed of memory. Sorry, guys, growing pains with all of this. But on the title page, and I'm going to switch this around, you have right here at the spot where the book was printed, a look at the frontispiece and the title page. And there you have Walt. I don't know, Justin, is that coming in clearly, that image of Whitman?
Yes, it's coming in pretty clearly. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. The everyman who was walking here in 1855 or around May, June 1855 to take that photo. And then, of course, this very famous title page. I'm just going to flip the camera for a second so you get a really good look at that. Very unusual title page because there is no author, there is no publisher. Whitman could not find anyone to support this book. As the photo shows, he was an everyday guy who had been a house builder for a long time in Brooklyn and then started working on poems, right? Decided that America needs poets. So the story with this site, which is a very important site for Whitman history, is that here once stood the Rome Brothers printing shop. And the Romes were two Scottish brothers just off the boat a couple of years before. Around 1848, they came here and set up a printing shop, and they were legal printers. So they didn't really print books. They only printed one book besides Leaves of Grass in the entire shop's history. But when Whitman, writing these 12 very radical, very raw, sexual, political poems, absolute nobody carpenter from Brooklyn, one-time printer, says, will you help me print them? Nobody else is printing them. And apparently Tom and Andrew looked at each other. Tom was the younger brother, he was about 18, and Tom was like, let's do it. Okay, but he's got to help set the type. So from that moment on, Whitman was involved in the production of his books. So the Rome Brothers printing shop really marks a couple of beginnings, right? First of all, it's where the book originated, but secondly, it's actually where the concept of the material book started for Whitman. Always involved, even to the very end, with the look of his books. So you might be asking what happened to that print shop. As you see, there is a housing development here, a brutalist style development run by something called the Whitman Owner Corporation. The house actually lasted to 1962. Sorry, the print shop. And in 1962, it came down as part of the urban development in this area. There was a movement to keep it up. And Allen Ginsberg was part of that, Marion Moore, a lot of poets, activists. The files are actually at NYU Library where I teach. But they couldn't stop the city. It was a time of a lot of build down, tear down, and build again, as Whitman would say. So it came down in the 60s, much to the regret of lots of people. It's actually one of the reasons that my organization, the Whitman Initiative, is very actively pursuing the landmarking of Whitman's last standing house in New York City at 99 Ryerson Street in Brooklyn. And I can tell you guys more about that in a second. Behind me, you see Cadman Plaza Park, which is a beautiful strip of green interrupting a lot of buildings. It's kind of a lung in this part of Brooklyn. And if I would take you across that green, you would come up to Walt Whitman Park. Sorry, I keep adjusting my mask. It seems to not, oh, I have it on upside down. That's probably why. Walt Whitman Park is, I think was 1945 when that was actually set up. Not a particularly lovely park. It's great that it's there, but I think that would be a place for people who really love Walt Whitman to try to do something in commemoration of the poet. And the Whitman Initiative, this organization that I run, has been all about that kind of activism, temporarily halted by lots of stuff going on around us. Here comes the firemen. Anyone remember that passage from Song of Myself? Walt loved those guys. But anyway, Walt Whitman Park, it's there and it's waiting for our attention. All right, guys, I'm gonna take you for a walk and I'm gonna flip this around so that I can show you where I'm going. And the idea is to take you all through Whitman's earliest experiences in Brooklyn. Sorry, I gotta pick up my bag, my copy of Leaves of Grass. And I know that this can be a little bit shaky because I've been watching these tours. Let me make sure that's working. Okay, there we go. Watching these tours and trying to get some tips on how to make it better for you all. So accumulate your questions and comments. I'm eager to hear how this tour actually goes. So I'm walking through this little passageway to Henry Street, the main drag of Brooklyn Heights. And you see here across the street some 1840s, 50s, 60s buildings that have been left here very nicely, lots of great shops. And again, on this side, more renewal. And I need to point out this particular sign to you. So we got to do better than that, guys. This is what marks the Rome Brothers printing shop, the Whitman Owner Corporation private property houses. What would Walt say about that? Here we swing around and I'm taking you up towards Henry Street. And I see I lost you for a second, Justin, right?
Yeah, no, that was my fault. It's not the connection. Sorry.
Okay.
I hit the button.
No problem.
You're good. You're doing great.
Crossing over Henry Street, guys. And if I would walk further up this way, we would pass a lot of churches because Brooklyn, from Whitman's time on, has been known as the city of churches, where lots of people took refuge from the criticisms they had received wherever they were coming from. It's actually one of the most beautiful walks you can imagine, going up Henry Street. I'm here at the corner of Henry and Cranberry, and maybe some of you know this great restaurant waiting to open again, Bavaco. This is at the site of the Brooklyn Apprentices Library at the corner of Henry and Cranberry Streets, almost across the street from where the Rome Brothers printing shop is, and then you get the idea, right? The daguerreotype gallery of Gabriel Harrison was right here. It really is a hub. And the reason that I pointed out the Brooklyn Apprentices Library location, which is no longer extant, is because that is where Whitman really got his first access to books. So Walt was born in 1819 in Huntington, Long Island. The family moved when he was just about 4 years old to Brooklyn. And I like to say part of the reason for this is the summer of 1816, because that was a very, very cool year for crops for Long Island farmers. It was called the year without a summer. And farmers out on the island struggled for years after 1816 to sort of like recoup their losses. So the Whitmans moved in 1823, possibly in connection with that, and also possibly because Whitman Sr. had taken a fancy to carpentry, and he heard about this city, or actually at the time a village called Brooklyn, where he might be able to do some really cool building. So they literally sold the family farm, and 1823 moved to the village of Brooklyn. And I'm giving you guys, let me see if I can get into the street because it's so lovely here. We're walking down Orange Street, and a lot of these streets have fruit names, right? Orange Street, Cranberry Street. And apparently it's because Mrs. Midog, one of the wealthier residents of this area, really didn't like how many streets were named after people, very wealthy people. So they started naming streets, Pineapple Street, Cranberry Street, and so forth. The irony about this is that there's a Midog Street coming up named after her. That's okay. That's okay. We'll give her that. Justin, I know you know this place very well.
Yes, love it.
And here we are again on Orange Street, and I'm crossing over to give you guys a really nice look of the Plymouth Church of the Pilgrims. This is such an important site in Brooklyn for so many reasons. Whitman came here off and on because he was fascinated with Henry Ward Beecher. And Henry Ward Beecher was the preacher here from, 1847 to his death, 1887. Terribly charismatic guy, right? Did things like had mock slave auctions at this church. So those of you that have read I Sing the Body Electric, when Whitman says a slave at auction, a lot of people think that comes from his time in New Orleans, but it could well have come from watching Henry Ward Beecher do these mock slave auctions at Plymouth Church of the Pilgrims. And here you have a landmark designation, and you can see they mention Lincoln worshiping here, the fragment of Plymouth Rock. So, you don't have to wait until we come out of quarantine. You can actually look at the Plymouth site for some of the goodies, but they do have a piece of Plymouth Rock there. And I think most interestingly for me as a Whitman scholar is that they have a time capsule that they dug out in 1997 that apparently had a copy of the Brooklyn Daily Freeman in it. And that is a paper that Whitman started himself as a free soiler in the late 1840s. Only ran a couple of issues before it collapsed. It's very, very, very rare. So the fact that Beecher and his church knew that that particular paper was worth saving, well, that tells you something about Beecher also. You're looking at an image of him here. I don't know if it's clear.
It's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah.
And also an image of the church, which of course doesn't do justice to actually going there. Right. And I'm trying to see if I could give you guys, let me walk a little further and show you the courtyard. There's a statue of Beecher there. And it looks like they haven't mowed in a while, so Beecher is standing in a gorgeous field of wildflowers right now. The figures to the right are figures of these African Americans. I think one of them was called Pinky, if I remember right, that he auctioned from the pulpit in a mock auction, raising enough money to buy the freedom of these people. So that's Beecher himself. And panning right, you see the church. So this is another thing you guys should check out on your own, because the church is very unusual for the shape of it and also for the windows, because the windows don't depict any religious scenes. No traditional religious stuff is in them. You have there's a window with, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting all of them, but secular important scenes of intellectual or political weight. So just sitting in there, for instance, they have a big Abraham Lincoln panel. It's a different sort of experience. It's a very intellectual and socially minded congregation. And I have to say that they're always super generous about letting us in when I bring tours around in real time to take a look inside the church. So this is the church building where you enter. This is a little bit younger than the actual church hall. But this is the place that you come in, and by special request, you can tour the basement of the church along with the church itself. By the way, we are on Hicks Street here, and I'm gonna get in the middle of the street because I can, and try to give you a little bit of the taste of delicious Brooklyn while I chat. It's so beautiful around here. Wood frame houses, the earliest point of settlement, and also the place where we have our oldest building. But before I leave Plymouth Church totally behind, let me just say that one of the most moving things that I've done is go down into their basement and see this Underground Railroad depot site. The reason that they think that this was actually a depot is that it comes up in records of, I think, what was the name? I think his last name was Ray. There were a couple of slaves that actually kept notes on the places that they went. So it's a huge basement with a lot of nooks and crannies, and it's very easy to imagine, you know, the hundreds, if not thousands, of African Americans that found their freedom by first stopping through Plymouth Church. So, how are we doing, Justin?
Wonderfully, really well.
Okay.
Everything looks great. It sounds good. No questions as of yet if you want to do Q&A, but I think you've got everybody's attention, so.
Cool, I'm gonna do a pan here so people can see this gorgeous intersection of Cranberry and Hicks Street with a lot of notable buildings. I don't know how my camera is doing with this.
Pretty well. Yeah, it looks great.
Good. And I'm gonna stop at what I think is one of the cutest buildings in the world, right here, which apparently is from the 1820s. It's been slightly altered, I think, but so it doesn't, there's a house that I'm gonna show you in a second on Middag Street that gets the credit for being the oldest house, 24 Middag Street. But this is just lovely, right? Apparently this was a barrel maker's shop before it became a veterinary hospital. And just to show you a little bit of Brooklyn, hey there. They're actually open for business.
There you go.
There's a friendly little goat there waiting for you to come up and make sure your pet is okay. So a bit of Brooklyn charm, right? A little doggy here, maybe waiting for a friend. Oops. There we go. And onward we go through this very charming street. Gonna let cars go by here. Some great restaurants, right? Built into these 1840s homes. Jack the Horse, a favorite spot. And then walking down here, some of the cutest cafes and stops that you'll find in New York. just a restful, shady place that reminds me more of Boston maybe than New York. So, any questions, Justin? Like, is anybody?
No, not yet. I actually have a question. I'm not sure if you're going to cover it, but I've been dying to know. There were some rumors that 64 Poplar was built by Whitman's father. Is that true?
Ooh, I am so glad you know that, because that confirms how widespread that rumor has been.
I thought it might be a rumor. I was hoping you could either prove or debunk it. So, because
Well,
it's been information out there, and I'm dying to know.
this is a great question, and I've gotten to know the very nice woman who lives in that house to ask her about that. She happens to be a real estate developer of all things, or sorry, a real estate agent.
Mm.
And she's not sure, but she took me into the backyard and she pointed out that there was a slate piece in the yard that had the initials WW on it.
Oh, wow.
You know, I don't know if that really ties in with Whitman, but it's totally possible that Whitman Sr. built that house on Poplar Street. I would take you guys there, but it's a little bit out of the way, and I'm a little bit worried about time and the charge on my phone. So I would say it's a question mark, but it's absolutely possible. It's the era that he came in. It's an 1830s building. So
The
what is
date
her
was
name?
1834 on it. Last time I checked, I think, on that particular house.
Right. Yeah.
We did have a question from Sheila, actually, if you want to try to field it now. Sheila asked, hi, Karen. I've never heard the term slave auction. What exactly was the point of such a practice? Okay,
it's a great question, because even when people read, and I'm just going to let people see something very nice while I answer the question, take you guys into, this is Middag Street, by the way. So I'm going to turn the camera around.
Karen, you there?
Needed.
You're coming in and out, Karen. Well, Sheila, I can help to begin answering that question as we get Karen back. We did notice there were a couple of patches of connectivity at this end of the height, so hopefully she can find her way back in a second. But one of the reasons why Beecher started doing the slave auctions at Plymouth Church was to raise money to actually buy the freedom of slaves in the South. And so he would make a really big deal about that, you know, and sort of bring them in. He was a great showman, and there are actually two statues to Beecher in Brooklyn Heights. There's one at Plymouth Church, and then there's also one over near Metrotech by J Street. And he was a huge, huge figure. Now Karen is back. Karen, are you there?
Am I back?
You are back. I knew you'd come back. So I was actually answering Sheila's question on your behalf, but please feel free to jump back in.
Sure. This was the slave auction question, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so Beecher meant to mock the practice, right? Like he wasn't supporting the practice so much as showing the ridiculousness of auctioning off human life in the same way that you would buy a machine or cattle. And Whitman recycles that in I Sing the Body Electric when he says, a man's body at auction, I help the auctioneer. He does not half know his business, right? Which is such a shocking way to begin a section of a poem, right? Like he helps the auctioneer, but his point is very similar to Beecher's in that there is no price on human life, right? Human life is absolutely priceless. And Whitman goes on to make this incredibly gorgeous statement in I Sing the Body Electric, basically supporting Black nationhood. And Beecher, too, in these slave auctions, raised the money to actually free the Africans that he brought onto the pulpit. So a kind of a quirky way of bringing attention to a horrible practice, right? I hope that answers the question. And I'm sorry that I lost you guys on Middag Street. What would Mrs. Middag say? But she would be so disappointed that part of her street was not shown, but at least I get to show you number 24, which I mentioned before gets the credit with being the oldest house in Brooklyn Heights. And allegedly 1824, I think, is the year. And I think part of the reason that it gets this credit, I'm trying to show you the carriage house back there too, which is really cute, a separate building actually. And then between that you have, of course, the garden. So it's country life in the city. It's not been very altered. So there are actually older buildings in Brooklyn Heights, but this building has such integrity. I mean, look at the incredible charm up there of the dormer windows, the twin chimneys. It's a classic federal style building. Now, before I cut out, I was walking down Middag Street with you, and I passed and I showed a sign between two buildings about these twin buildings being from the 1820s. So, or actually the year 1820, right? So there are buildings that are perhaps older than 24 Middag, but they have been so altered that they don't count in the same way that this one does. If you are wondering about the racket around me, guys, I bet you can predict what street I'm really close to. I don't even know if I should call it a street. That is the famous BQE, okay? Which for once, you can actually see cars moving on it. You see that? The notoriously worst highway in America right there runs beneath us right now. I'm walking right over it. And that also has a great story connected with the founding of the Brooklyn Heights Association, which is one of the nation's oldest preservation groups. And the Brooklyn Heights Association was formed partially because they were fighting during the time of Robert Moses putting the BQE through the Brooklyn Heights area. And somehow through the bonding of people and petitioning, it did not happen, right? The BQE was actually channeled beneath Brooklyn Heights. So we're on the top level here of Brooklyn Heights, but cantilevered below us is the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. So no view is blocked. In fact, we're approaching one of the most glorious views in the world, at least to me, which I can't wait to show you. So actually, we're just stopping a moment because I know the camera wiggles quite a bit. This is the Harry Chapin Playground, which usually is, of course, bustling, but now is closed temporarily. But that doesn't stop moms and kids from coming out and just parading along Columbia Heights here for the view and for the fresh air and for the inspiration. So when I step out here, I'm going to cross over Columbia Heights. Before I do that, I'm going to give you a view of this street. So swinging around here and then coming around to my right. So there's a lot to talk about here, but also just a lot of beauty to see. And I'm hoping the camera can pick up the delicacy of all of those bridges sort of one on top of each other, right? The Manhattan Bridge in the background, the Brooklyn Bridge just seen. And then you have actually the so-called Bridge of Sighs, that white bridge conjoining the two white buildings on either side. The story of these buildings goes back to Whitman's time. There was a scientist living contemporaneously with Whitman named Edward Squibb. And the name might ring a bell to some people, right? Part of the big drug company, American drug company family, dynasty, right? Bristol Myers Squibb, I think, is the whole name of that. But Mr. Squibb himself was a former Navy physician, and he patented the use of ether for, oh, sorry, let me get this completely straight. He's a physician and, you know, someone who worked with medicinals and drugs, and he developed a use of ether to use during operations that really changed the world, right? It made him a very wealthy man. It set up his company, but he never sold that patent. He actually kept it public as a public service. So Squibb is quite a hero when you think about 19th century medicine. Whitman never knew him personally. That would have been way out of Walt's social sphere. But he was definitely living in the same Brooklyn as Whitman. And what I'm showing you here is in the front, Squibb Park. So this is a little park, mostly for skater kids. But just beyond, and right there where you see the girl walking with her dog, is Squibb Bridge. So you can see it crossing over in between those new condo buildings and the view of Manhattan behind, right? The East River in front of it, a really, really glorious view. So Squibb Bridge has had quite a history. It was built and I actually walked on it. Justin, did you ever get to?
I did. I did, yes.
So people were really proud of this bridge because it had a sort of a jumpiness to it, a bounce. It was built like a jungle bridge,
yeah.
But that was also its downfall because it just wasn't sturdy, right? It apparently was unsafe. So they closed it, they opened it, they closed it, they opened it, they closed it. I've been doing these Whitman tours for a long time, and I remember one summer I could walk across, one summer I can't. And then finally they recently closed it, I think in 2017, and they just reopened it, right? So if you're looking down here, you see people using it. It's absolutely glorious. In fact, I thought to myself, should I take you guys down Squibb Bridge, or should I take you down to the Fulton Ferry Landing? History won, so we're gonna go down there, but that is also such an awesome way to see Brooklyn, to go down across Squibb Bridge. Actually, I have a map right here. Thank you, Brooklyn Bridge Park. We tried to focus on it. Can you see that, Justin?
Go down a little more, yeah, and get a little closer. Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so just pointing out that we just saw Squibb Park here, and that is Squibb Bridge, right? Bridge. That goes across into the Brooklyn Bridge Park. While we were here, I will point out the granite prospect in Brooklyn Bridge Park, and I can actually hear the cheer from my Whitmaniacs, because that is where, whoops, get this to come back. That is where for 17, well, not 17 years, almost 17 years, we've held the Song of Myself Marathon. So it's a glorious spot, right? Sort of a natural amphitheater used with these granite logs. And we all sit there as the sun is setting to hear Whitman's epic poem, Song of Myself, read aloud by volunteers. Totally free event, just meant to refresh the soul, right? And keep that barbaric yop on the streets of New York City. So I'm walking down, and I have to credit Justin with this tip, but apparently this has been called Jehovah's Fitness, this hill, because after Squibb left the vitamin factory in the early 20th century, Jehovah's Witnesses bought these buildings. So as you see, they're pretty cleaned up now because they're turning into luxury condos. Jehovah's Witnesses left, I don't know, I'm gonna say now less than 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago. And this Whitman class that I've been teaching at Columbia for now 20 years, one year I had a lobbyist for Jehovah's Witnesses in the class, and he actually gave me a tour, which is very rare for someone who is not a Jehovah's Witness to get. The Witnesses had quite a stronghold in Brooklyn Heights. They made a lot of money selling off their properties. They left, again, a few years ago, selling it to developers. And in these buildings here, formerly the Squibb Vitamin Factory, they printed the Witness. The Watchtower, which is that leaflet that you get if you have a Jehovah's Witness knocking at your door, right? Their periodical. So, can you see me, Justin?
Yeah, you cut out for 1 second and came right back.
I got a warning that my battery is low.
Okay.
So how are we doing on time?
So we're at 11:41.
Okay.
So
I think I'm gonna lose some battery power, which is unfortunate because I wanted to take Q&A and I also actually wanted to do a recitation, but I'm gonna try to speed up just a little bit. And if anybody has a quick question before we get to the landing, I'm happy to answer it.
So it seems there's a lot of interest in a list of addresses where Whitman had lived that you may have in your possession.
I wish I had that in my possession.
Not right now, but what I said was, Brad backed this up, Brad Vogel, who is joining us today. So what I said to the group was, if you send me that list, I can do an email blast to all of the registrants on the tour today so that they can get that, if that's possible.
Absolutely. And you can get a head start on it, guys, by going to the New York Public Library digital collections, because in the Berg collection at the New York Public Library is that list of houses. I had it in an exhibition that I curated last year with Susan Tain called Poet of the Body, New York's Walt Whitman. And we actually had that list there, but Whitman kept track of all of his houses, at least we think he did. And he lived in over 30 houses while he was in New York. So again, what I want to stress about that is of all of those 30, I'm trying to get the bridge here for you, only the Ryerson Street house remains. And that's the reason really that we're so eager to preserve that house. It's the house where Whitman finished Leaves of Grass. And it's a marker that poetry can come from anywhere, right? It's a very simple house compared to some of the buildings that you think of when you think of great authors. So if there is a place to run out of battery juice, it's right here, right? This is just glorious. The scene of the Brooklyn Bridge, and I'm gonna pan from the Fulton Ferry Landing below here. So that, my friends, is probably the most beautiful vista in the world, to me anyway, the view of Manhattan over the East River here. At that balustrade that you see in the distance, you actually have the poem Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, excerpts from the poem in the banister. And the ice cream place that's in that former firehouse tower, that was the place where they kept the hose because the ferry often caught fire. So they had to loop the long hose into that tower that you see there. That's Ample Hills Creamery. Those are awesome people, and they have named their ice cream shop after a line in Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, right? So it's all Whitman all the time right here. Poetry is alive. And I'm gonna just pan up because all of this is so beautiful here. And right across the street from me is, I know, a Shake Shack. Yes, another Shake Shack. But that building has been here even before Whitman's time, that was a point of departure and arrival for people since the ferry started. So there was always kind of like a bar or a shady restaurant in here, just somewhere where you would go before you would have to go home or before you'd have to go to work, right? Because Whitman took the ferry from here when he worked in Manhattan in the 1840s. And I'm gonna work this, maybe stand in Fulton Street here, Old Fulton Street. And I need to show you the building here on the right. It's not such a good shot. Wait, I don't want to get run over here. So I'm crossing over. But that's the Eagle Warehouse building. And Whitman would not recognize this, but part of that building, inside this building, literally, were the offices of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. So Whitman, before he was a poet, he was a printer and a house builder, but also a journalist. And the Brooklyn Daily Eagle was really the place that earned him more of a reputation. He edited that paper from 1846 to 1848. Finally got fired for his increased politics, and that's when Whitman took off to go to New Orleans. The first time he really leaves New York is February 1848, and he heads to another radical port town, which is another story. So I'm crossing over here, trying to use up everything that I've got to give you this beauty. Whitman would have known this walk. He wouldn't have known the Brooklyn Bridge, right? And Mysterious, not that much about the bridge either. Justin, can you, I know it's.
We're getting a little bit
Justin?
of wind and you're coming in and out at the moment.
Let me try to go a quieter way.
That you're good right there.
To that final view. Can you hear me?
I can, you're pretty good here. And then you cut out. I think Karen, we tried this before. We knew this was an iffy spot, so she's going to try to go to the other side. And hopefully she will have enough battery to finish off. This was her last stop, by the way. Oh, and she's back.
Hey there.
We hear you. Oh, you got it. You did it.
All right. So here.
Oh, and you're gone again. It is a beautiful view, Janice. It really is. It's one of the best. All right, you're good.
You hear me?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. I made it to the final stop, and of course behind me,
Woohoo!
yeah, you have this incredible view. So maybe I'm just going to take as many questions as I can before I run out of juice. But just because I'm here, and I always request that my students memorize poetry and recite it at spots like this, so I feel like I must do it too. Stop this day and night with me, and you shall possess the origin of all poems. You shall possess the good of the earth and sun. There are millions of suns left. You shall no longer take things at second or third hand, nor look through the eyes of the dead, nor feed on the specters in books. You shall not look through my eyes either, nor take things from me. You shall listen to all sides and filter them from yourself. I have heard what the talkers were talking, the talk of the beginning and the end, but I do not talk of the beginning or the end. There was never any more inception than there is now, nor any more youth or age than there is now, nor will ever be any more perfection than there is now, nor any more heaven or hell than there is now. Urge and urge and urge, always appropriate,
Happy birthday, Walt. Really, really beautiful. So we do have a couple questions. Do you think you could take them?
Sure, and anything that I really can't get to, I'm happy to kind of answer if you guys have a forum for that.
Sure. So we only have a couple. Actually, Brad asked, was there a favorite spot on the tour that your friend Greg loved?
Ooh, this is a really good question. I don't know, because Greg loved everything so equally, but I think so many of us gravitate to this spot, and I have to think about exactly 1 year ago today, because that was the week of International Whitman Week, and so many of us were on tours led by Greg that actually wound up coming down here and just being together and reciting Crossing Brooklyn Ferry and feeling that magic that Whitman writes about in that poem, right? That's a poem all about New York, right, and the greatness of New York. You know, as he says in that poem, it avails not. Distance avails not. Time nor place avails not. And you feel that sense of eternal connection, something really enduring about the New York spirit here. So Brad, really good question. I wish I knew Greg's favorite hangout, but I would say that just like Walt, he would say, it's all beautiful, right? He loved everything.
There were also people who were wondering how they could get involved or help with the landmarking of the Ryerson house.
Thank you so much for asking. We temporarily had that on hold with the coronavirus outbreak, but we definitely want to go forward with this. The way to start is to visit the Whitman Initiative website. We have a lot of information up about the latest activism that we've been involved in. As many of you know, we were denied landmark status by the Landmarks Preservation Commission way back in 2017. They actually heard us out again at the end of last year, and there was some kind of feeling, right? The book was not closed. So we are determined to push forward with this. We would really love to see that house there for the generations to come, right? To just see where Walt wrote Leaves of Grass. It's just an ordinary Brooklyn house. And maybe I can do another tour and bring you guys down there.
That'd be great, yeah.
It's really worth seeing because it just puts everything in perspective. If you go up to Massachusetts, you see the mansions of Emerson and Longfellow and Hawthorne. With Whitman, it's a totally different story, right? Just an everyday house. And that's where this incredibly democratic poem starts.
Yeah, and somebody asked, how is it a bus ride to get there? It's actually, you could do a bus, you could do a bike, you could walk. I've been there a couple times. I just take the G up and then walk it over. But yeah, there's definitely easy ways to access it if you like walking. It's a nice little walk. But maybe we will do a tour. I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I did it for you guys last year, and it's just, you know, it's a beautiful stroll down Myrtle Avenue if you start at Fort Greene Park. But if you're coming from the south, from Pratt, you can just walk. Actually, the Whitman Initiative just renamed the intersection of DeKalb and Ryerson, which is right there south of Pratt, as Walt Whitman Way. So we were very excited to get that recognition. Oops.
You're back. We have a very important question, which I think everybody's dying to know the answer to, which Janice asked, and then Levon has one too, which I'll ask too. Karen, your favorite Whitman poem?
That's so hard.
I figured that might be a hard one, but I think people want to know, can you narrow it down?
Oh my gosh. Well, if I don't say Song of Myself the
right.
day before of our Song of Myself marathon, I would be in deep trouble.
There you go. Song of Yourself.
But I am a particular fan, and many of you know this, of the Live Oak with Moss poems and the Calamus poems. I feel like Whitman exposes his soul and his desires in such a moving and honest way in those poems. I know from myself and the people that I've spoken with, my students, that those poems have done a world of good. It's a reason to love this poet, right, and his poetry, that it continues to do good in the world.
Agreed.
So,
Levon asked, H.D. Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau meet Walt Whitman?
Yes, very
in Brooklyn?
famously. They met in Brooklyn. Thoreau had heard, and not everybody was paying attention to Whitman. Emerson got a copy of Leaves of Grass from
Right.
Whitman, and he wrote Whitman a very famous letter that probably just enabled Whitman's career. And based on that, Thoreau came with, oh gosh, I know a whole bunch of you know the name I'm looking for, the social activist. Okay, well, anyway, Thoreau came with someone to visit Whitman down on Classen Avenue when Whitman moved from Ryerson to Classen, and they famously exchanged books. So Whitman gave Thoreau a copy of the 1856 edition of of Leaves of Grass, and Thoreau gave Whitman a copy of A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. I had them both in an exhibition that I curated with Susan Tain last year, and Whitman used his copy of Thoreau, made marks, wrote a really lovely introduction on the front fly leaves, but Thoreau barely opened Leaves of Grass. And famously, Thoreau later said about Leaves of Grass, it is as if the beasts spoke. So Thoreau was the other side, right? Thoreau, a lot of people don't know this, Thoreau lived for a while in New York City. He was down on Staten Island doing tutoring and trying to get his writing career up and running. And he hated New York. He writes about this in his letters. He hated the crowds. He hated the immigrants and the mess. He just wanted to get up somewhere peaceful. And meanwhile, we have Whitman embracing multitudes, right? Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. And he meant that, from a personal as well as a poetic perspective. The poem, especially Song of Myself, is supposed to speak to everyone.
Great. And Levon said, was it Lucretia Mott who you meant?
No, it was the guy. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, but that's a really good guess, but it wasn't a female, it was a male. It'll come to me after my battery comes out.
There you go. That's how it goes, right? So you're getting really rave reviews because this was an amazing tour. Would you like to just inform everybody of what's going on this weekend? I know there's a bunch of stuff tonight. There is a showing of Poetry in America, Whitman, which you are going to be on. So if you just want to let everybody know what's going on for Walt this weekend.
Yeah, Poetry in America is premiering tonight on the World Channel, I think, at 7:30. Tomorrow, as I said, the Song of Myself Marathon at 1 p.m. Please go to the Walt Whitman Initiative website and you'll see a YouTube link that will take you to where the marathon will take place. And I also want to put out a shout out for my friend Karin Poonrad, who directs Campagna de Colombari. They've done an amazing show called More or Less I Am. And if you go to Campagna de Colombari's website, you can see they've produced a new digital version of this very moving, immersive performance based on Whitman's great poem. So even though we can't celebrate in the ways that we usually do on this weekend, I'm so glad to be talking with everyone. And again, Justin and Michelle and Augustin, thank you for enabling
it's
this
our
connection.
We love it. And again, Waltman, not anywhere near you guys, but he has a very, very big place in my heart as a writer and a poet too. And before we sign off, you have the bridge behind you. And I always had this theory that Walt Whitman was basically a mystic. He was a 19th century mystic. And I think it was the Herald, the paper asked him before he died. He came up from Camden and they said, "What do you think of the bridge?" It wasn't done yet. It was almost done. And this is his quote, and it's so touching. "It's the best, most effective medicine my soul has yet partaken. The grandest physical habitat and surroundings of land and water the globe affords, namely Manhattan Island and Brooklyn, which the future shall join in one city of superb democracy, amid superb surroundings." This was 20 years before Greater New York was formed, and Walt Whitman knew by looking at that bridge that was the future of New York, the city he loved so much. So I always end my Brooklyn Bridge tour with that. It's so touching. It just brings you to tears. So thank you so much, Karen.
Well, it is amazing that you know that quotation, because a lot of people think that Whitman kind of ignored the bridge.
Yeah.
You know, because it was being built after he really left New York. He went
Right.
down to the Civil War front in 1862. So, you know, he really didn't see the bridge completed in 1883. And I think maybe in his heart, he had a sentimentality about the ferry.
Right.
So maybe that prevented like a poem about the Brooklyn Bridge. But I think as someone who loved progress and technology and just sort of the appeal of the grandeur of this bridge,
Right.
that really brings it back home, Justin. Thank you.
Oh,
Beautiful.
my pleasure. Thank you. I thank everybody for joining us today. Please support the Walt Whitman Initiative.
Yes.
Join them this weekend. It's going to be great. We hope to see you again, and we'll definitely, if we're still doing virtual tours, even after the pandemic restrictions lift, maybe we'll have Karen come back and do a virtual Ryerson House tour as well for everybody, because I think that would be great. I thank you all for joining us. And again, we'll get back to you with that list if you don't find it on your own. Thank you, Karen, so much.
Oh, you're so welcome, Justin. And just a final word, you know, because I know that some people get very depressed because of the orders to be inside, especially us New Yorkers. It's been really hard on the city. Just one final word, that poetry is always open for business,
So true.
and to find comfort and rejuvenation in the lines of Whitman's poetry. For me, that's what it has been all about. So I want to thank you again for enabling me to share that with everyone. And hopefully this just brought a little bit of that into everyone's space. So.
Totally true. Thank you, Susan, so much. Have a great weekend. Have a great weekend celebrating Walt. Happy birthday, Walt Whitman. And to all of you, stay safe and be well. We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thank
you, everyone. Okay, great.
Bye.